let's look at like the uh, American Rescue Plan, big omnibus COVID relief plan stuffed with all kinds of money for all kinds of things, designed to stimulate the economy and help out from the COVID problems. AOC says beforehand, and there are multiple headlines about this. So if someone of AOC's stature makes a statement about a legislative fight that she's about to have, and you have MSNBC and The Hill and other places that run headline stories about the fact that you say that you're going to start this fight, that those stories aren't happening by accident. Okay, like it's not like oh, they just happened to run remarks on her account. Generally speaking, in Washington, when that happens, it's because there's been a coordinated effort by the staff of the congressperson to get that out there. So she gets a news cycle at the beginning of the rescue plan process out of saying, I'm going to be the champion fighting to include a minimum wage increase. She then very conspicuously not only does she vote for ARP without that stipulation, but she pretty much just folds immediately. I mean, there's no sense in which she is sort of working the sort of back room, trying to push this thing. Now, the Eric Levitzes of the world will just say, hey, Joe Manchin's in the Senate, so nothing can be done, nothing can be accomplished. But I think that is precisely the sort of thing where you need to fight, if for no other reason than to sort of establish the principle that there will be votes in the future. It's not always going to be a 50-49 or whatever split. And you're going to be able to, you're going to have to be able to show that, you have muscle behind this so people know this is a thing that you take seriously. I will note, since that happened, right, have we had, significant movement on a $15 minimum wage since then? No, right? Like you have to take advantage of these moments and establish the precedent for the future. And I think the big point for me that I think really no one has addressed, certainly not Eric Levitz, but no one has addressed is, I am just frustrated as hell by like being caught between AOC is this transformational figure who transcends politics, and she's swept in here on a revolutionary agenda, and she's like the future of our party. And wow, she's so amazing. By the way, please donate to our campaigns. And then that immediately turns to, oh, but you can't expect anything, right? Like, wait, you thought that she was going to like accomplish something? Oh, you're so naive. You're so silly. That's absurd, right? And it's just been this way with the left Democrats, for at least, 5 or 6 years. It's just that like the constant sort of back and forth between we're coming in to change Washington and please give us your dollars because it's so important.
Right.
But also you're naive and a fool if you think that we ever could have accomplished anything.
Yeah. So to go back just a little bit, not only was there this shift on a willingness to fight for to include a $15 minimum wage in the American Rescue Plan, but there was reporting that Pramila Jayapal had been whipping to the contrary, that there was apparently some thought, some idea of there being a block of these progressives in the House that were willing to at least try to scuttle the American Rescue Plan coming out of the House, but for Pramila Jayapal saying no,
right,
as the leader of the Progressive Caucus, saying no. Then obviously it moves into the Senate and it's in the Senate that Chuck Schumer decides to take the $15 minimum wage out. And then there's this whole up-down vote with Kyrsten Sinema that we've gone through a million times here. But there's still no articulation. There's no even rhetorical effort to complain about the parliamentarian maneuver being in bad faith. So even if it technically is outside of their hands in some of these votes that would become more performative because they didn't actually have the votes, let's say, in the House for something like that, to stop something like the American Rescue Plan, there still is this failure to articulate a stark contradiction, a stark contrast with the Biden administration that many of us expected her to make, given the fact that she was making statements in recent history like, in any normal country, Biden and I wouldn't be in the same party. And you saw Bernie Sanders, like, for better or for worse, in that particular fight, making more of a full-throated articulation of why the $15 minimum wage needed to be back in there. But even he didn't go so as far as to say Chuck Schumer did not have to take it out at the advice of the parliamentarian. And then going on TV and making the case that we've been making on podcasts like these, that you didn't have to, not only did you not have to listen to the parliamentarian, but if you had left it in, you would have put those Manchin cinemas of the world in the position to have to vote down the whole entire COVID relief plan that bailed out the American economy, that kept the economy going, that enabled the distribution of vaccines, all because they hated $15 minimum wage that much, something that is an enormously popular program, even among Republicans.
Right. And I mean, another thing that, would be nice to happen, through one of these, even if it's a failed legislative effort, is it would be really nice to sort of, like today, nail down Joe Biden and say, hey, how about the $15 minimum wage? Right. Like to get real clear indication, like, is this something that could pass your desk or not? What drives me a little bit nuts is just that, like,
well, also, I'm sorry, just to be clear, like today, Biden can say, I don't have the votes. But the whole point of the American Rescue Plan was that it was one of two bites of the apple that they had that year to do a reconciliation bill, which only required 50 votes, not the 60, 50 plus one, right? So now the one of the most frustrating things was they let lapse the few opportunities they legitimately had to prove that Joe Biden wasn't actually a good actor. And now that moment is in the past, he can more authentically make the argument to the American people that his hands are tied.
Right. One of the things that I thought, that was really revealed by that, I mean, this has been the Joe Manchin experience in general, but it's incredible to me that the blue, no matter who people, right? Mm-hmm. In any election, you just have to vote for the Democrat no matter what. Are the same people who say, oh, well, we can't do anything because of Joe Manchin. But Joe Manchin is what you get when you say blue no matter who.
Excellent point.
Right? Like when you say blue no matter who, you have no protection against Kirsten Sinema's or Joe Manchin's because, hey, blue no matter who, baby. If you're in Arizona and or in West Virginia, your only option is to vote for these people who will then go ahead and scuttle any hope for a progressive agenda.
Absolutely. So let's go through some more of the examples that you raised in your piece. What other examples of kind of hypocrisy from AOC and her flank of the left do you point out?
I mean, look, like it's hard for me to think of issues that are more of a sort of red line, do not cross sort of a thing for me than voting to break a strike. Right. And this is something that I hold against Bernie Sanders as well, which is, I mean, look, we just saw the Teamsters extract a contract out of UPS that UPS really didn't want to have to sign. That was much better. Whatever you want to say about the deal, and I'm sure it'll be prosecuted for years, whether it was good enough. Whatever you want to say about the deal, the initial offer was much worse. The Teamsters were able to get a much better deal for hundreds of thousands of UPS workers because they had the threat of a strike. And the threat of a strike meant we can cost your company hundreds of millions of dollars in losses. Do you want to do it? And UPS decided they didn't. They would rather sign a better contract. So to look at the railway workers and say, you know what, I'm going to use 11th dimensional lefty chess and suggest that, that voting to forbid you the right to strike is somehow in the best interest of this movement. To me, that's just a sort of like a red line.
Yeah.
And
I couldn't agree more.
Yeah, and for me, it's just like with some of the frustration of a reaction to a piece like this. If somebody out there wants to say, well, you have the wrong values, well, fair enough. If somebody out there wants to say your values are mistaken, that's fine. But it's like they just won't process the concept that, like, no, you see, this is a value to me that I consider something that cannot be violated by people who I trust and want to vote for. And, that's just how I am. It's like I am obligated to think in these sort of institutional ways of like, yes, but what's really best for the Democratic Party? And I do think that, and I've been saying this a lot, but I do think that is a fundamental difference between the relationship between, left liberals, progressives, and the Democratic Party on one side, and conservatives and the Republican Party on the other side, which is conservatives are just vastly less often or less likely to be put into position by the Republicans to say, I have to choose between my values and what this party is saying is best, right? And as a lefty who is trying to maintain some faith in the electoral politics system, who doesn't want to just wipe my hands of the whole thing. It's hard to do that when people say, okay, this woman didn't express solidarity with the Palestinians in her vote, but you gotta support her anyway. She voted to break a strike, but you gotta support her anyway. Like I'm just tired of being put in that position by Democrats.
Hey, you write in your New York Mag piece, and more concretely, if this wing of the left-leaning Democrats was always so powerless that we would be fools to demand anything in exchange for supporting them, what were all the donations for? The Justice Democrats and various associated figures, particularly Bernie Sanders, have hoovered up millions of dollars in donations since the 2016 presidential primary. That wing of the party, is in the habit of bragging about the fact that this money comes from small donors, from regular people like you and me, rather than the rich or big institutions. But will AOC or anyone in her sphere ever divulge what we have purchased with our donations? It seems decidedly unlikely. Now, I pull that quote out in particular because just today, this kind of fascinating piece dropped by Daniel Marins in Huffington Post, in which he talks about the layoffs at Justice Democrats as a consequence of their pretty significant funding problems. So donations are down across politics, across wings of the Democratic Party, and generally speaking, the article interviews people and puts forward some potential reasons for that. It doesn't seem to really capture what you're describing here, though. This idea that people thought they were bargaining, that thought they were purchasing something with those dollars that hasn't manifested. And it also very interestingly dovetails with another argument that you make in your piece, where you point to AOC's present vote on Israel's Iron Dome funding as another example of the inconsistencies with which she will do a protest vote versus not do a protest vote. In the Dan Marins article, he points out that so much of the Justice Democrats' funds have been sucked up by having to defend Justice Democrat candidates against the enormous amount of AIPAC-affiliated PAC funding that is aimed at making sure that these progressives not only don't win, but lose their seats. That being the case, you still don't see people like AOC or progressives articulating a frustration with those AIPAC-aligned PACs that are run by people like Hakeem Jeffries, who they all lined up behind and clapped while the Republicans were doing their force the vote moment earlier this year. And it seems to me that there's something that's really missing in the mainstream analysis when they don't understand that the potential base and the funding base that these leftists drew upon is not a base that's compatible with the kinds of sycophantic behavior that they demonstrate toward the people that should be their enemies, the people who have tried so hard to fight tooth and nail to get them out of Congress within their own party.
But I mean, I feel like a lot of the sort of people who we're talking about are opposed to the very notion that if you donate or you vote, you're entitled to expect or want anything. Right? I mean, the attitude is really like, you have no alternative. We're better than Trump, and you'll take whatever we have to give. And I can tell you, like, you know, I think probably the sort of proximate event that inspired me to write that piece is the fact that AOC went on the Pod Save America podcast to endorse Joe Biden, which I don't know why you have to endorse the sitting president in July of the year before the presidential election. I don't know why you need to do anything. I don't know why you have to endorse at all. You can just keep your mouth shut. I don't know why you can't just put out a one-sentence press release and say, hey, I'm endorsing Joe Biden.
So president's only primary opponents are Marianne Williamson and Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Haven't been any rumors about anyone else even thinking about jumping in. Will you be supporting Joe Biden for re-election?
I believe given that field, yes. I think he's done quite well, given the limitations that we have. I do think that there are ebbs and flows, as there are in any presidency. You know, there are areas that I think were quite strong when he came right out of the gate with the American Rescue Plan. And of course, the Inflation Reduction Act was a massive step in terms of our climate agenda. But, you know, there are also areas that I think could have gone better. We have major structural issues in this country, and I think it starts with the United States Senate. And I think that until we have senators that are willing to stand up and stare the filibuster in the eye and stare a lot of structural issues about the Senate, and the United States Senate will be what holds back this country from an enormous amount of progress.
It certainly seems motivated because I mean this very explicitly. There's nothing in the media that is more of a direct line from the sort of Obama wing of the sort of Democratic Party, the Democratic coalition, than Pod Save America. I mean, that is the like institutional mouthpiece of the remnants of Obamaism. And all four of the guys who regularly on that show are, I believe, are former Obama staffers of one kind or another. And so that's not, you don't go on that show thinking that you're not sending any kind of a message, especially when you're doing it to endorse
well, that's the one pushback that I would give. The one critique I would have of your article is that I don't think that she went on there to endorse Joe Biden. I don't think she woke up and said, hey, I want to endorse Joe Biden super badly, and so I'm going to call up my friends at Pod Save America to do it. It seemed like she was on there to talk about any number of other things. You can question her choice to go on podcasts like that when she does not go on any leftist podcast at all. I think that's completely fair. But I do think that she was just there in the course of a general interview, and they asked her, if she would endorse Biden or any of the other candidates. And she said, well, given the field, I will be endorsing Joe Biden. So I do think that it wasn't some master plan, the optics of which she chose. But I completely agree with you that there's absolutely no reason a progressive, including Bernie Sanders, should be endorsing Joe Biden before the end of a Democratic primary.
Right.
If they have to do it at all, obviously. But if they're going to do it, why not wait till the primary is over? Do you really think that it's going to rise or fall on AOC or Bernie Sanders saying, yes, vote for Joe Biden?
But it's also like, okay, so like the present vote for the Iron Dome funding, I just find completely politically incoherent. Nobody who is a hardline supporter of Israel will ever support AOC anyway. Even if she did want to sort of kowtow to that lobby, she would do it with a yes vote, not with the present vote. So she gets like the worst of all possible worlds. I'm struggling to imagine the number of available voters out there who in July 2023 are like, okay, it's either RFK or Joe Biden for me, but whatever AOC says, I'll do. Right? Like it's like the actual political calculation in terms of like what an endorsement is ostensibly supposed to do makes no sense, right? But of course, it makes perfect sense if it's like, okay, it's the opposite way. She's just trying to show her deference to the party.
Right. Especially when, I got to say, the part of the reason why everyone fell in love with her in 2018 was because she did vote for, and I believe canvass for Bernie in 2016. She did do something that at the time was kind of a more radical, controversial position. She was someone who protested at Standing Rock. She was someone who really seemed to be willing to take the unpopular position if it was the right thing to do. She was someone who popularized, for better or for worse, defund ICE, regardless of all of the hand-wringing articles about how it was toxic political muck to be associated with that slogan, because it was something that she felt like was the right thing to do. She endorsed Bernie Sanders after the heart attack in 2019, at the end of 2019, because she felt ostensibly that it was the right thing to do, even though she had been Warren curious up until that point.
Right.
And so for her in this moment to do what is not even that high stakes, which is to say, I value the primary process. I value what candidates like Marianne Williamson, who largely are running on a Bernie Sanders platform, are bringing to the debate. I have been disappointed that Joe Biden has dropped much, he says he wants to veto Medicare for all, but even that aside, that he's dropped all conversation about the public option. And I think having progressives in the race is a good thing for democracy and for our party.
Yeah.
Who could possibly fault her, given who she claims to be, for a statement like that? And so when she won't make a statement like that, I think it's justifiable to ask, is she in fact who she claims to be?
Right. I mean, it would have been a very, very easy thing for her to do on Pod Save America to say, I'm going to let the process play out a little bit. It's only July of 2023. We'll address that when the time comes. I mean, that's all you do.
Mehdi Hasan, in a recent episode on Pod Save, offered more pushback to the Pod Save guys than AOC did.
Look, I could talk about all the good things he's done. We talked about the economy. There's a lot of bad things he's done, especially on the foreign policy front. Don't get me started on Israel, Palestine, Netanyahu. Don't get me started on MBS. A conversation for another day. I've been very critical. And healthcare. I think he's dropped the ball on that. But let me just on the election front, I am torn because on the one hand, I am one of those people who, like yourself, says, come on, you cannot vote third party when fascism is at the door. We have a two-party system. A vote for a third party candidate helps the fascists. But I've been consistent on that. In fact, I had Noam Chomsky on my podcast years ago before 2020 saying, yeah, you got to vote Democrat. Even Chomsky came out, which he does every 4 years, to be fair to Noam. He comes out and says, you got to vote for the Democrat. Republicans are to the climate. Even Noam gets it from the left. Having said that, I'm also someone who sees himself as a person on the left. I am very disappointed in many things about our economy, our healthcare, our foreign policy, things that the Democrats have failed on or turned a blind eye to. So I get the disappointment as well. Now, the argument then becomes to the people who are disappointed, you can say justifiably, you can't really vote third party candidate. That will let Trump back in. On the other hand, if they're the kind of people who are going to let Trump back in, what are you offering them? Right? It's a two-way street. On the one hand, the left has to understand what the greater threat is, and it is fascism. I mean, Cornel West said that in 2020. What's interesting is Cornel West, while he backed Jill Stein in 2016, in 2020 he endorsed Biden, saying fascists are at the door. So that argument is fairly straightforward. But if, on the other hand, if you have a lot of liberals and centrists saying, oh, look at these lefties, they let Trump win. Well, if the lefties are that influential that they can let Trump win, maybe you should do a little bit more for the left, I would say.
Yeah. No, look, I think, you know, the piece that criticized AOC in New York Magazine was like, you know, they accused her of appearing on an episode of Pod Save America where the hosts were saying that a vote for anyone but Joe Biden was a vote for Donald Trump. And I saw that, I was like, well, that is true. That is a true statement.
He offered more pushback than I've heard on that show for a very long time, insofar as they were talking about third-party challengers and what the left is up to and their frustrations with Joe Biden. I think actually in the wake of your article, this conversation was happening. And Mehdi Hasan was like, look, you can sit here and be mad about it, but people aren't wrong to say that you have to court their votes and that Joe Biden's going to have to do something rather than just complain about the fact that, like it or not, there is this frustration among leftists. I would have loved to have heard even that from AOC, that Biden is going to have to figure out how to win the votes of people who much prefer the policies of Marianne Williamson or the energy and foreign policy of someone like RFK Jr.
Yeah.
And he's going to have to do something about it. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, for me, like a big picture thing is, I know I have a big political network and of people I know personally, and then I sort of have everything that I do online and with my work and my media, my newsletter, and everything. There is probably not a politically meaningful large, but still like a large number of people who were lefties who got pulled back into caring about Democratic Party politics by Bernie Sanders, who voted for Bernie in 2016, who got excited for AOC in 2018, who voted for Bernie in 2020. And people who said, look, the party is now seriously talking about Medicare for all and about a Green New Deal. And that's what sort of gave them the sort of reason to sort of get back into like, okay, I'm going to vote, I'm going to throw some money their way, etc. Those people now look at a party that does not talk about Medicare for all, that does not talk about a Green New Deal anymore. And they say, okay, you don't represent my interests, so I'm not going to vote for your candidates. I'm not going to donate to your candidates. And what I think is insane is that the Pod Save America guys, the Eric Levitzes of the world, the whole sort of left-punching sort of edifice out there, they say, oh, that's so selfish, that's so unrealistic, you're being so crazy, you're asking for too much. It's like, no, that's how it works, right? You as a voter say, these are my values and what I need from you. If you're not going to offer those things, I'm not going to vote for you. That's how politics works.
Hey, YouTube. Thanks for watching. Just a reminder that this is a podcast. You can catch an extra premium episode every Monday for $5 a month at patreon.com/badfaithpodcast. That's patreon.com/badfaithpodcast for $5 a month, an extra episode every week. Additionally, please do consider liking this video, subscribing to this channel. It helps us out. It helps independent media beat the algorithm. We appreciate you. And as always, keep the faith.